Hey there, I'm Mark from Spectrum Pulse, and today we have from Avantasia Here Be Dragons. So there's always been a narrow line that Avantasia, and by extension a lot of symphonic power metal, walks between glorious excess and when it tilts into pure ridiculous cheese, where I still have a fondness, but I also tend to be a lot less forgiving because it's way less sustainable on a full-length project. And the heavy metal of the 1980s tended to be chock full of that extremely dicey balancing act, kind of regardless of subgenre. So when Tobias Sammet announced that Here Be Dragons was going to be a deliberate throwback to that sound for an album that was not conceptual at all, instead focusing on the sounds that inspired him as a teenager, well, suffice to say, I was a little skeptical of how well it would land, and I hate to say that I was somewhat right on that account. To be blunt, Here Be Dragons sounds like Sammet pushing the Avantasia formula towards that 80s throwback sound, down to some of the muddy mixing of the guitars and the questionable bass and the gleaming synth gloss, where if we had huge gated drums that might have come from a drum machine, we would be all the way there. And you know what? Okay, I'm not against a throwback. I've got some nostalgia for that nerdy side of metal too. It can be a lot of fun. But this is a warts and all throwback, where you know those 80s heavy metal bands would have sounded better if they had budgets or competent production to get there, normally by the time the 90s roll around. And once you get past that nostalgia pop, it can start sounding pretty rough. None of this is helped by the album starting on a particularly rough foot. Creepshow is a pretty good melodic hook, but I've never found the whole Creepshow concept all that endearing across Avantasia's catalog, and the title track is just this overdone, shambling, mid-tempo mess that can never build to its hook effectively, continuing the proud tradition of the Jeff Tate collaborations consistently being the worst songs on Avantasia albums. Now it does get better from there, but it becomes impossible to ignore how formless the bass lines are, or how the drums just don't have the flair or complexity to match for the faster thrash and speed metal adjacent tempos that were emblematic of that throwback era. Or maybe it's because it feels like they're being produced to have no proper body compared to some of the louder riffs, which in Avantasia's general oversaturated style, complete with a massive backing choirs, but minus stronger crescendos or potent dynamics, leaves the album feeling so breathless. Until at least we get a power ballad to close out the album, and it's literally called Everybody's Here Until the End, and has ex-Camelot frontman Roy Khan, who actually sounds pretty excellent there. Kind of an interesting contrast to Tommy Karavik on The Witch. And yes, some of this formula can work for a song or three, like the Moorlands At Twilight with the goofy neoclassical touches and the dueling guitar solos where the bass has some more muscle, or Bring On the Night as a synth-heavy gallop with Bob Catley, or how Avalon is probably the best song here, with the closest thing to Celtic metal that Avantasia has ever done, with Adrian Cohen sounding really distinctive from any other singer, with a strong symphonic melody in the horns and bass line and a great solo. But when The Witch drowns its lead guitar and synths and soupy effects alongside the chunkier riffs and the symphonic bombast, and then doubles down with the overdone warping compression on Phantasmagoria, which has Ronnie Atkins going for absolute broke in order to fight through it vocally, or those faux gothic metallic synths on Unleash the Kraken that don't fit at all amidst the excess of squeals, well, that's a problem. And then that takes us to the lyrics, and even accommodating for how goofy the poetry is, because it's symphonic power metal after all, it's hard not to read much of this beyond just metatextual as Avantasia as a project, especially with the title track deliberately referencing previous albums. The sort of uncharted territory where Avantasia ventured into that wilderness and found comfort and fire and passion and creative inspiration in the wild and fantastical that some people just will never understand. And while this is also subject matter Avantasia has touched on before, rarely has it felt so on the nose, where on the penultimate song, Against the Wind, for the bridge, the instrumentation largely drops out, and we get the lines, "If you don't like what I do, then it's not made for you, and if you get exasperated with what I will, or I may, or I say, it's my way." Alright, awkward syntax aside, it's rare I see the defense of the album in the actual text. It seems like they knew the criticism was coming. And on some level I get it. An album like this is going to have a specific nostalgic niche even within Avantasia and in symphonic symphonic power metal fans. But I am exasperated, and I don't care for this as much as I want, and the problem is that I am in the group he's describing. I'm a symphonic power metal fan and theater nerd who has not only been reviewing Avantasia for damn near a decade, but I own swords. I've been running a D&D campaign inspired by an 80s setting for over 30 sessions. This sort of album should be exactly up my alley. But for as much as nostalgia is an explanation, I don't think it's a good excuse why the production's more slapdash, and the compositions are so short on dynamics, and the writing feels thematically undercooked and derivative of what Avantasia have done before. You could have had this sound while not imitating past missteps. They're not integral to the process, and I know that because in other genres we sat through a decade plus of 80s nostalgia that's avoided some of that decade's worst elements. But to pull all this together, look, I don't want to say Here Be Dragons is bad. It feels purposeful in being a deliberate throwback, something that Tobias has always wanted to do to pay tribute to his inspirations. But it's not a clean marriage with the modern expansions of Avantasia's sound. He's moved beyond this. I think he works better with a clear thematic direction than the scattered grab bag of songs. Arion has the same problem, look back at Actual Fantasy, even if that's how a lot of speed and power metal albums of the 80s were. And as such, I think this works better in pieces than as a whole. And there are legit great songs, but I gotta say it, this might be the weakest of his projects that I've covered to date. It's still pretty good, but it's not close to great, and while I'm still gonna be here until the end, I sure as hell am hoping this is not it. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you want to see more, please be sure to like, share, drop comments, subscribe. Yeah, this might be contentious. I've really wanted to stick up for this band for a long time. I like Avantasia. I've been reviewing them since 2016. Again, damn near a decade. It's just frustrating because I don't like this nearly as much as I want to, and it feels like it is set to target my nostalgic niche, but again, there's a limit to how far that pop will take you. But hey, leave your comments down there below. This hasn't been getting quite the reception in certain spaces I was expecting, so I'm curious on your thoughts. Beyond that, though, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And if y'all want to get involved in helping support the channel, get albums on my schedule, yell at me on my Discord, link to Patreon and YouTube memberships are over there. Don't feel obligated. Tough times, believe me, I get it. But hey, until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.